Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second session of our third Jornadas Boston College. A special welcome to all our students and members of our community. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you, Analia, for hosting this event. And over to you, Annie.
Thanks, Ivana. Welcome to all our students and Children's School Boston College community who are watching us now. I'd like to thank all our school team, especially Martha Crespo, who will be moderating the Q&A session after the presentation, and also to Marina Fernandez Crespo for her technical support. And of course, a big welcome and thank you to Elizabeth Yentumi, who's going to share with us her views on racism at home and abroad. Elizabeth was born and raised in South London. She studied French and Spanish at university. During her studies, she spent a year abroad teaching English in Buenos Aires and studying in Toulouse. Following university, she taught English for a year in Malaga and has since worked in human resources where she helps senior leaders to get the best out of their people at work. Welcome, Elizabeth. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Analia. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm just going to share my screen so I can share a presentation that I've put together for you today. It's called Racism at Home and Abroad. So home being Argentina and abroad being a couple of the other countries that are experiencing issues of racism at the moment. So thank you for having me today. It's really great to be with you all again. Let me just, sorry, if you give me one moment. Okay, can you see my screen, everybody?
Yes, everything's perfect.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so this presentation is titled Racism, Home and Abroad. I'm Elizabeth, as Analia said, and I'm going to take you through a few thoughts that I've had around Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK, and the Black Lives Matter movement in the US as well. So I would love to hear your questions, your thoughts, your comments. They're so welcome. Please put them in the chat bar and we'll have a look at those later. I think Martha's going to help with that later on. Just to say, I'm very passionate about this subject, but I'm not necessarily the world's expert on lots of these things. So if you disagree with me or with something I've put in here, you think, actually, I think I know the answer to that, please do share because that will enrich this for all of us here. So last time I came to speak to you, we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK, but also in the US. So I want to talk a little bit about how things have changed from when I was last here with you, which was, I think, early last year. So as you know, the Black Lives Matter movement was put together by members of the Black community who wanted to get societies, institutions, companies to really acknowledge some of the struggles, some of the systemic issues that people of color and Black people face in their daily lives, in various parts of their lives. So saying that we are all equal and we all have equal access to opportunities. Actually, when you look at some of the details of those opportunities, that isn't always the case. So the Black Lives Matter movement has been working on that for some time now. So what's happened since last year? So you'll remember that George Floyd was killed in the US last year, and there have been lots of protests since then and lots of attention and support towards given to the Black Lives Matter movement. There have been debates in media, society, sport, in sporting industry, private companies, public institutions, governments. You've got lots of businesses who are trying to support companies that are owned by Black people and trying to spend their money there to kind of increase the customer base of those companies. You have organizations who've released statements to say, you know what, in our organization, we are completely committed to having an equal society, to having equal ways of doing things in our organization, to make sure that we are a diverse organization. There was also something called Blackout Tuesday, which you might have seen, but on Instagram and on social media, people posted a black square, nothing but a black square. And this was came from within the music industry to try and address some of the racial inequalities and highlight the racial inequality in the music industry across the world. Some of the things that you might have seen as well are athletes and sportsmen and women and people taking the knee. So they go onto one knee before a sporting event to also draw attention to the fact that there are lots of Black people struggling at the moment and facing this discrimination and racism. And there have generally been, in lots of organizations, lots more talking and attention and policies and just lots of activity to make their workplace a more diverse place, a more inclusive place where people feel valued, and just to increase the level of equality in the workplace. So this is another Black Lives Matter picture here of one of the protests in London. You'll see on this lady's sign here that on the left side, she's got the people in the UK who have, the Black people in the UK who have faced injustice, but then also the Black people in the US who have faced injustice. So we definitely in the UK have a lot of these issues ourselves. So what kind of challenges have there been? So lots of people would agree that the Black Lives Matter movement stands for something that is really important, which is equality. But there have been lots of challenges towards the movement. So lots of the activists and the people who are part of championing Black Lives Matter receive lots of hostility and aggression towards them from people who don't agree that this is an issue that we should be talking about, that we should care about. Lots of organizations at the time when George Floyd was killed said that they did care about diversity and equality and including all different types of people. But actually since then, they haven't really done anything differently. One of the organizations that has done a great job is Ben & Jerry's. I don't know if you know the ice cream brand. I'm a big fan of their ice cream, but they have done a lot to kind of show that they are really committed to this. Since George Floyd died, they haven't gone quiet as some organizations have. There are just generally lots of differences of opinion on this issue. So people will think, oh, it's not really part of our society in the UK. This is more an American problem. We even had a government report that's called the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities that said, actually systemic and institutionalized, sorry, it's a tough word, racism don't really exist in the UK. And so that's something that we really struggle with. Black African households, however, are 75% more likely to experience housing deprivation than white British households. So that means their housing is not up to standard, is not up to the level that it needs to be. And we still have continuation of racial discrimination, which means that Black and minority ethnic communities are at greater risk in lots of different areas. One of those is in policing and the justice system. So something I wanted to show you here is this graph that shows that between March 2019 and March 2020, there were roughly 105,000 hate crimes recorded by the police in England and Wales. And that's gone up by 8% from the following year. So hate crimes are, well, I'm sure you know what hate crimes are, but crimes on the basis of some kind of difference where you can be discriminated against. It could be because of your religion, it could be because of your race, it could be because of your sexuality. So that's why someone could commit an offense towards you, and the reason is we call that is hate. So clearly we've not really fixed some of these things since we've kind of started talking about Black Lives Matter more frequently in the UK. So I hope you've got those questions or those thoughts coming in the chat bar. I want to move on now to the American Black Lives Matter movement, which has also been going pretty strong. So they had some really interesting marches last year, and they, as you can see here, so since the murder of George Floyd, there have been more than 4,700 demonstrations. So this is a huge number, but somewhere between 15 and 26 million people in the United States have participated in demonstrations over the death of George Floyd. There are there's been lots of public support from different organizations. So that's the National Football League, NASCAR, but there have also been lots of organizations who have said, you know what, it's really important that our staff are diverse, so from different backgrounds. They feel really included working here, especially our colleagues who are people of color, and that we create loads of equal opportunities for people to progress and to do well in this company. So even though the number of protests kind of died down by September 2020, 55% of Americans claim they still really strongly support the movement. But things have moved on from there. So the state of California is even talking about reparations of slavery. So even though slavery ended in 1863, former slaves and the families of former slaves were never compensated. So that's something they're talking about now. How do we compensate these families who were subject to the terrible institution of slavery? I've got a few more things to share here. So the new American president, Joe Biden, says that systemic racism is a stain on the whole nation's soul. So they have government support in terms of the aims of the Black Lives Matter movement to a certain extent. That may not be to the extent that those who run the movement would want, but President Joe Biden has vocally come out to say that racism and systemic racism are wrong. Businesses, again, are trying to support Black-owned companies more. I mentioned the thing about organizations talking about how they make their places of work much fairer. There's also been a lot of scrutiny on the people who run companies and run organizations. So that's the senior and executive teams. If you have a country like the US where 13% are Black, but 13% of the population are Black, should you then be trying to get that kind of representation on senior boards, on executive boards that run companies? So that's something that people are looking into, companies are looking into. Some companies are doing really well. So there's a consultancy firm called McKinsey who put out a statement, but they followed it up with a program to talk about how are we going to become anti-racist in this organization. And they dedicated a huge amount of money, 200 million over the next 10 years to actually advance racial equity and economic empowerment just all across Black communities in the world. So here you will probably know George Floyd's, the officer who killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, was convicted on all 3 charges and was given a prison sentence. So that's where we've come on in terms of the death of George Floyd. And then a few more things here specifically about police brutality. There have been an increase to reforms to address some of the police brutality in the US, which is really good news. So Minnesota passed a bill to improve the training that police officers get to make it less aggressive. In New York, the governor told all the police departments that they need to reform their police departments in order to keep getting the funding that they need to exist. There's been lots of work in Los Angeles to look at taking some of the money, taking funding and shifting it towards alternatives to putting people in prison. Defund the police is a slogan that you might have heard of, and one that I talked about last time, but one of the really interesting policies that parts of the US are looking at is taking money from the police department budgets and actually putting them towards other programs. It might be a community program, it could be something else, but just looking at different ways of enforcing law and order in their cities. And then final thing here is Breonna Taylor, who was killed last year as a result of a no-knock warrant. So police in plain clothing forced their way into her where she lived as part of an investigation into some drug dealing operations. She was killed as a result of that. The city where she's from, they are talking about they've banned these no-knock warrants, so across the city, but they're also looking at banning them across the state, and this is something that would be called Breonna's Law. So what are the challenges for the American side then? So these police killings have not stopped since, so these are a list of people here who have all been killed by police: Rayshard Brooks, Dijon Kizzee, Jonathan Price, Casey Goodson Jr., and Andre Hill. And there's a little statistic here that just shows that since 2015, a huge number of deaths have occurred as a result of police shootings, and Black people are still disproportionately affected, but as are Hispanic people as well. So there's still some work to do there. I've talked a little bit about the racism in the UK and the racism in the US. Something that I was also asked to touch on a little bit was kind of racism at home. So racism in Argentina. Now, there's absolutely no country in the world that doesn't experience discrimination, doesn't experience racism. And having lived in Buenos Aires, not for very long, I had some interesting experiences being a Black person, but this research into kind of Argentina's history with racism and race is really new for me. So anything you see on here that you think, oh, I don't think that's quite right, Lizzie, Elizabeth, just let me know, put it in the chat, because I'd be so interested to hear from you in terms of the kinds of things that I found and the information I've gotten, mainly from articles and from some academic pieces of work and our good friend Google. So this is just what I've been able to find, and then I'll share with you some of my personal experiences when I lived in Buenos Aires. So this is the kind of stuff I found when I was doing my search. Racism is described as a complex, hidden and entrenched social problem when it comes to Argentine racial history, but discussion about it has really increased over the last decades. I found lots of different journals and articles that had come out over the last 10 years. You probably know a lot of this. But the start of slavery was known in Argentina was known to be in 1585 and was known to end in 1835. Over that time, approximately 200,000 slaves arrived in total, either from Africa or from Brazil. This really interested me. I didn't know this. But in 1778, I found this in a couple of different sources. Africans and Afro-descendants made up about 37% of the Argentine population. So like many other countries, slavery was outlawed in 1853 and continued a little bit longer in Buenos Aires. And then what's really well known is that between 1850 and 1950, 7 million European immigrants arrived, I think primarily from Italy and Spain, but please correct me if that's wrong. And another really interesting thing is that different former presidents have kind of said over time, oh, Black people don't really exist in Argentina. That's something that happens in Brazil, and the state removed the racial category. So when you fill out a form, or at least for a passport or something, or for a survey or like a census, you would be able to say what your heritage is or what your race is, rather. And actually, there wasn't a category for a very long time for kind of Afro-descendant or African or Black. So it was said that the state began to make Black Argentines more and more invisible, and were presenting the country as, fully of European descent. Everybody came from Europe, and we didn't really have Black Argentinians. So I've come across some activists, Afro-Argentine activists, who fought for the latest census, I think that was 2010 census, to include an option for Argentines to register themselves as Afro-descendants. And improvements have been made over the last century in lots of different ways to include references to people from all backgrounds in government constitutions, government policies, and that's something that I think is still progressing and improving. I did read on several articles that there are some aspects of Argentine culture, like the tango, asado, which might even have African roots. So I think that is really interesting. So I'm keen to hear what you think about some of that. This is a picture I found that shows in the 19th century, these are a group of Black slaves who are actually paying homage and kind of honoring the politician Juan Manuel de Rosas, just to show like a historical and picture of Black Argentinians in the 19th century. Okay, so something that the kind of most recent thing I found out was that in 2021, Quaker Oats announced they were rebranding Aunt Jemima. So this is Black figure that they had, and Blanca Flor was a similar product, which had this logo on it of this Black woman. This was created in 1956, but both logos, which showed Black women, and those logos are considered and were considered to be racist imagery, got rebranded and got changed. So that is something that I found out happened earlier this year in terms of changing and becoming more aware and acknowledging some of the kind of racist parts of our logos, our companies, and things that we've just had for a long time. For example, Quaker Oats is a really famous, popular brand that they had to reconsider, the imagery that they were sharing. Okay, so this is a question for you. I can't see you, I'm sorry, but this is just if you have a pen or a paper, this is a question for you. Do you know the population of Black Argentinians in Argentina? Is it 150,000? Is it 75,000? Is it 2 million? Or is it 30,000? So just make a note of what you think it might be. And I will share what could be the answer in a couple of seconds. Okay, hopefully you've been able to have a guess, or maybe you already know. But it turns out the 150,000 is the official number. That was a result of the 2010 census, which totals up the whole population of a country. But however, some of the Afro-Argentine activists who were working to make sure that the census included a section that said Afro-Argentine or Afro-descendant, they worked really hard to do that, but unfortunately, only 10% of the forms that went out, whether they were electronic or on paper, only 10% of the forms that went out actually had that category on it. So there's a large group of Afro-Argentines who estimate that the number of Black Argentinians is closer to 2 million than it is to 150,000. So I'm keen to hear what you think about that as well, and whether anyone has a bit more information on that. But I find that really interesting. Another question for you. Do you know the names of any Afro-Argentine activists? I didn't know before putting this presentation together. But in the US, you have people like Angela Davis. We all are familiar with Martin Luther King. But would be interesting if we know some Argentine activists. Okay, so these are the activists that I have come across in my search. If you know any more, please put them in the chat. I'd love to read a little bit more about them. But on the left, we have Maria Poca La Madre. I hope I said that right. I don't know if I did. In the middle, we have Alejandra Egido maybe. And then we have Jennifer Parker on the right. And they've written some really interesting documents and information around some of the struggles, some of the realities of Afro-Argentines at the moment. So I would encourage you to go and search those. I put some links in at the end of the presentation to go and find out a little bit more from them if you're interested in this. With my last 5 minutes, I just want to share a little bit about what people say, Afro-Argentines say about living in Argentina. And then I'll talk very briefly about my experiences, but I found it really interesting, some of the stuff I read, but I also really resonated with it because of some of the questions I was asked when I lived in Buenos Aires. So Juan says, we've been exiled from the collective memory of Argentina, and he is a 7th generation descendant of Argentine slaves. He says, it's as if you pass someone in the street and you have to explain your whole, sorry, that's just life, your whole life, what and who you are. Sorry about the typo. Then the next one is Miriam Gomez, who's the president of Union Cabo Verdeana. And she says, we're constantly being asked where we're from. It invisibilizes and denies our existence. During most of the 20th century, there was absolute silence regarding the Black experience in Argentina. We were erased from all books, all media, from all scholarship, and from all statistics. So some really powerful statements about what it's like. Particularly now, my experience, I had a really brilliant time when I was in Buenos Aires. I want to be very clear. That first picture is from Recoleta, where I got to live, which was for some of the time I was in Buenos Aires, and then I gradually moved out and lived in different parts of the city. These are my favorite empanadas. They're called El Origen del Sabor. They are absolutely amazing. I would really recommend. I used to eat them as much as I could. Probably put on a bit of weight at the time. I spent time going around the different, I didn't support Boca necessarily, but I didn't support any football team at the time. I'm an Arsenal fan. But I went around and just really enjoyed different parts. And my mother, who you can see in the picture there, came to see me, and I would take her to Puerto Madero and show her around. We went to all these different places. So I had a brilliant time while I was there. However, I did, let's see if I can get next. I did have, you can see a couple of pictures of me this is nearly 10 years ago now. I did have some really interesting experiences. And the one thing that stuck out for me forever, that I'll never forget, is wherever I went, somebody asked me, where are you from? And at the beginning, I didn't really mind. But after a while, in those conversations, what became very clear was that people I was speaking to didn't really think I could be British, because they didn't they maybe thought that actually Britain was for white people, and didn't maybe know about the huge diversity that Britain has in terms of Africans, Caribbeans, people from lots of different cultures. And so they always expected me to be American, Brazilian, and then maybe African. But that didn't land well when I said I was British. But then I also realized that as a Black person, if you keep asking me where I'm from, then it also probably suggests that you don't think I could be Argentinian either, because as a Black person in London, I know it's a bit different, but as a Black person in London, I don't get asked where I'm from, because there is an expectation that I would be from the UK. Whereas as a Black person in Argentina, there was no expectation that I could be from Argentina. But as I've just shown you, there are lots and lots of Afro-descendants, Afro-Argentines. And so after a while, that it did kind of, it affected me. It wasn't a hugely negative experience, but I didn't like constantly explaining to complete strangers where I was from. This would be on the bus, on the subte, in the lift of my own apartment building. Anywhere I was, someone would ask me, the supermarket, anywhere. And so you just, the message I think behind that, if you are a Black person, and particularly if you're an Afro-Argentine, is that if I keep asking you where you're from, I'm basically saying, or I'm insinuating or implying that you are not from here. And I think that is some of the things that the quotes that I showed you from Afro-Argentines, that must be an experience that is quite difficult. I knew where I was from. I knew that I was going back to the UK and I wouldn't be asked again, but it was something that I found really interesting. People asked me a lot of questions. They were very friendly when they found out where I was from, like, oh, you're from London. Wow, what are you doing here? What's your job? You know, and I was always happy to have these conversations. It really helped my Spanish, first of all, so that was brilliant. People often thought I was from the Dominican Republic, and that was interesting. I kind of got used to that after a while. Sometimes I had a bit of unwanted attention. So I would step onto a tube or step onto a bus and people would point and stare and talk about, it would seem like they were talking about me because they were pointing at me and talking at the same time. So I kind of got the impression they were maybe speaking about me. Sometimes I knew they were speaking about me because they were speaking in Spanish. They maybe didn't think I understood them. And so, you know, after a little bit of time, it doesn't make you feel that comfortable all the time, but that attention did happen from time to time. People ask me funny things like, "Are you Beyonce?" I was like, "Do I look like Beyonce?" So sometimes it was, and then sometimes it was a bit more uncomfortable or made me feel a little unsafe. My biggest difficulty was with taxi drivers, and yeah, it was just interesting. They would ask lots of questions, and I think that was, again, a great way for me to practice my Spanish, but the questions were always on my race. And so sometimes that was a little bit tough. But I did learn a lot from others. And as I said, really helped me with my Spanish. But the overriding message was, yes, you couldn't be Argentinian because you're Black. That's not, we don't really have a large community here. So I'm just going to finish off now. And just show you that, as I said, I got this information from lots of different places. And so if you feel like finding out a bit more information, please go ahead and have a look. That last video here is just really interesting. It's a lady's account of, it's called Si Yo Soy Afro. And it's like, what it's like to be Black in Argentina. So I think it's really worth a watch if you fancy learning a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you.
All right, there are a lot of questions in our chat.
And
when you interacted with them and asked how big the African community was in Argentina, there were very many guesses. So, ooh, yes. And well, I'll start with some of the questions. They asked, some of them want to ask you if you have been a victim of racism or discrimination yourself.
That's a good question. So yes, I would say I have. I think so. My earliest memory was when I was a teenager and I was at the bus stop with some friends and we were waiting for the bus, and a car came by and some people leaned out of the car and just yelled the N-word at myself and my friends. We were together, just a group of Black kids, probably like no more than 11 years old, 12 years old. And we just got, we got a lot of, we got some abuse with a car that was driving past. There was nothing we could do about it, but you just don't expect that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Some other things, I think sometimes it hasn't always been very clear to me, but it has felt uncomfortable. So I was away with my parents and we were in a place where there weren't any Black people at all. And we've done this a few times. I don't know why we pick these destinations for holidays sometimes, but we've gone to places where we've just been made to feel uncomfortable. And you don't know if it's on the basis of race, but it has felt that way. So I've been followed around supermarkets before, or around a shop when I've been trying to buy something. I've walked out of a shop and the alarms have gone off. and my bags have been searched. Again, that's somebody doing their job, but you know, it makes you feel pretty angry. And then the final one I'll share is that I was crossing the border from upstate New York to Canada. I was on a bus, and I was going to visit my cousin, and I was one of the only Black people on the bus. I think I was the only Black person on the bus, and I had my stuff just searched, like sniffer dogs go through my things in front of lots of people, and the border control just pulled everything out of my bag. It, like, you just imagine, you just think, oh, this is so embarrassing, with about everyone on the bus, 30 people just watching my stuff get chucked out, underwear, everything on the and then they found this box of mints, but they thought they were drugs, and I kind of tried to show them. They were in a box, a tin box that was a double-decker bus, a red double-decker bus from the UK. Just, you know, and they were convinced that these were drugs. I was like, oh, I can even eat one for you to show you. But I was a little bit ignorant in terms of how to handle that. I was a little, I think I was maybe not 20. Again, you don't know if those things are on the basis of race, but sometimes the treatment, because it's only happening to you as a Black person, feels like it's discriminatory. So yeah, I think they're the ones I can think of at the moment.
So sorry to hear that, really. Did any of this happen while you were in Argentina, Elizabeth?
What happened in Argentina? So I had a couple of interesting incidents in Argentina. But I think it was kind of often it was kind of mistaken identity. I think there were assumptions made by people about what kind of person I was, and I think it was a little difficult at times. As soon as I said, you know, I'm British, or you know, then things calmed down. Before identifying myself as British, I sometimes got myself into a couple of sticky situations, but also some of the schools I was I got to go to so many different schools. I got invited to so many different schools, like I think maybe 30 across Buenos Aires and then outer Buenos Aires. And some of those areas were not always very safe, and so that sometimes you kind of had to, you know, be a bit more aware of just your surroundings. That's the same in any city. And I would sometimes have a bit more, some more difficult issues in areas that maybe were a little bit more deprived, or not, you know, not as safe. But yeah, pretty 90% of my time in Buenos Aires was just really great. It was only a little bit of the time that I had some difficult altercations with people. Yeah. All
right. Again, I'm sorry to hear that.
Okay.
But the percentage was small. Okay. I think Wada wants to know what a teenager can do to combat racism.
What a good question. Oh my goodness. That's a brilliant question. I would say that, like with lots of things, being aware, being well read, you know, understanding the issues at home and abroad is really important. So I think what can happen, again, this happens everywhere, is that it's very easy to see the problems that are happening outside of your community or outside of your country or outside of your city. It's very easy for the people in the UK, and we do this a lot, people in the UK to look at America and say, oh my gosh, look at all these police shootings, look at all this police brutality. But not all of us in the UK actually pay attention to what's happening at home. And in the UK, we might not have police shootings, but we do have issues of deaths of people who are being held in custody. Maybe they're, you know, maybe due to go to court or due to go to prison or something, but things happen, and we have an issue. We have our own issues. We have issues in our organizations. So what I'd say is that as much as you kind of keep watching things, and testing what you hear, and having debates with people who are interested, I think that's a really good idea. Something that a teenager can do, is to, and you're already doing that as students right now, so you're very good at that. Taking all this knowledge, just I would spend time making sure that everything you learn about in other countries, in other areas, you learn about for your own context, for home as well. So like, if you didn't know of an Afro-Argentine activist like me, maybe do a bit of research and find out a bit more about them and what they're doing. And maybe it's not just the African population, maybe it's the Indian population as well. There's so much. So I would just keep reading and keep making things relevant for you. I think the other thing I'd say is that you won't be a teenager forever. So soon, when you are in a workplace, the way you kind of treat people, educate people around you is really important. So if you're in a position and you hear something that doesn't sound quite right, if someone, I'm sure your teachers will say this to you anyway, if someone is disrespectful in some way, and you are in a position where you could say something to them, maybe it's your fellow student, you could say, instead of saying like, oh, that's really bad, why did you say that? Because that can cause more, I guess that can cause, more arguments. What I do when I hear something I think is disrespectful or I think is wrong is I ask a question, and I say, why did you say that? Or what made you say that? And sometimes speaking to someone who's been disrespectful, asking them those questions, it gets them to really think like, where has that come from? And say, I don't feel comfortable with you speaking in that way, or, like, I think this person might feel uncomfortable by what with what you just said. Don't get yourself in any trouble. You don't want to say that to random strangers on the subte. I'm not saying that, but in certain like safe environments, you have a voice, and you can challenge what people say around you if you don't think it's right. So
yeah, that's a good idea, putting a question. Hey, not so naive question, right?
Yeah.
All right. Alvaro wants to know what you think about racist insults that we witness in the Euro Cup final, right? And how players were mistreated, insulted because of missing penalties. Well, the football racism, say, in a nutshell.
Yes, great question, Alvaro. I've been thinking about it a lot the last 2 days. I had been watching most of England's matches. So, I'll be really honest with you. It's the first time I've spoken about it to anyone, so it's great. I'm on YouTube sharing my thoughts. But on Sunday night, I was watching the football with my family, and I'm not in the UK at the moment. I'm actually in Ghana, where my parents are from, and we're watching the football. And then for those of you who don't know, the match was between England and Italy, and we went to penalties at the end after some extra time at the end of the match. I don't know that much about football, but when it goes to penalties, it's getting very serious. So essentially, what happened was that the 5 people took the penalties from the England side. 3 of those were not white. We had Sancho, who's Hispanic, we had Rashford, and we had Saka. These are the 3 non-white players who took the penalties, and those 3 are the 3 that missed the penalty. So essentially, the 3 penalties that were missed out of the 5 were missed by non-white players. Now, I can tell you that this is a very common feeling that lots and lots of Black people would have felt as each of those non-white players went up to take their penalty, was just a feeling that said, please score, because if you don't score, the abuse and the racial abuse that will come to you, but not just to you, that will come to Black people, specifically Black people in the UK, will be huge. We will all suffer if you don't score this. So as the first person took and missed, second person took and missed, second not my player took and missed, third player, I just felt more and more scared. I was pacing the room. I couldn't sit down. I was pacing because I just was so, I knew what was coming the next day. I knew what the media would say. I knew what would happen on Twitter. I knew, and I'm not the only one. Speak to nearly any Black person who watched the game in the UK, and they would tell you that they probably could have guessed exactly what was going to happen and would have felt the same way. I actually watched a video with a couple of Black activists the day after who said exactly what I'm saying to you, that they were just afraid. And then when obviously the players missed, I just had dread. I was just scared about what would happen the next day. It was even worse than I thought it would be. I thought it would be the newspapers more, but it was actually personal attacks. So for those of you who don't know, for the social media accounts of these three players were filled with racial abuse. So pictures of monkeys, bananas, telling people to go back to their country, using just liberal use of the N-word. I have never seen the N-word so much. I never say the word myself. Liberal use of the N-word. And it was awful. I don't even know, I don't have words for it. It was just, it was awful.
Outrageous, infuriating.
All of it. Yeah, I was angry, I was upset, I was disappointed, but I wasn't surprised as well. I just was like, yeah, of course, this is what we're doing. Black people were attacked in the evening on the way home from the match because of how angry white England fans were. There were some Black people who were attacked. A 12-year-old was shouted at on the way to school on Monday. Again, the N-word. And so, I don't know, that's a really long-winded way to say that more needs to be done. There's lots of organizations that are saying more needs to be done. Football organizations, the Prime Minister in the UK, condemned what happened, said it was terrible, said those who had racially abused these players should be ashamed of themselves, but I would say that the issue to me is that there are no consequences to abusing these players. There are zero consequences, and because a lot of it happens on social media, you can be anonymous. People can't necessarily find you. In addition, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter don't necessarily, if you report one of these negative comments, there isn't always a consequence as well. So I think Instagram were talking about how there were too many comments, too many reports to do anything about it. So they weren't going to do anything about a couple of the comments that came up on the Black players' Instagram account. So there's just no consequences for it. And it's a hate crime. As I showed you that graph before, it's a hate crime, and which means it's an offense. It is literally against the law, but we let it happen. And I think that if the football associations actually stood up and said, unless this behavior changes, we're not having any more football, I think something would change. And I think at the end of the day, these players have to play knowing that if they mess up, that's the consequence. And I think it comes back to racism being really part of our society, where a white player can just play and enjoy. I don't know about enjoy it, with a lot of pressure. They can play, have the match, and then a Black player knows that as soon as they mess up, there is kind of this torrent of racial abuse, and that's a lot more pressure than white players have to deal with. And I think that difference is just one of the inequalities that they have to live with. But they've all been yeah, just really supported by the Black community in the UK as well, and other communities. So yeah, it was pretty awful. I had to take the day off social media today and yesterday just to for my
to have a break from it all.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
But how insane it is to punish anybody for making a mistake, because the first person who wanted to score was the footballer, right? Because that's the game they are playing, and it's as if we never learned, right? And as you said, as long as they are not held responsible, I mean, these people who are spreading hatred, as long as they are not held responsible, or they are humiliated, I don't know, in the media, in mass, in social networks, this cannot be tolerated, really.
Yeah, but it's been tolerated for a very long time, Martha. It's been decades. Yeah, it's centuries, centuries. And football, since Black people were playing, at least in England, I can say England, it's been a long time. So there's some former players, John Barnes, Ian Wright, if anyone's heard of them, they experienced, I think, even tougher, because it was some years ago. They really have suffered. You get banana skins being thrown onto the pitch when there hasn't even been a mistake. A Black player hasn't even made a mistake, and that kind of thing happens. Lewis Hamilton is someone who has experienced a huge amount of racism. And yeah, I'd rather you talk about my performance. I don't know what my race has to do with it. So yeah, it's a real struggle. Yeah.
And Theo wants to know if you feel proud or you have a sense of pride about the fight you put up against racism.
A sense of pride. Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know if I feel a sense of pride necessarily. I don't think so. I think because I think I would feel more pride if I saw something change and I could say, wow, look what we did. But it doesn't often feel like things are changing. That's a little depressing. But I think I think I don't feel pride, but let's say I feel purpose. There's a reason why I care about talking about these things, why I have a passion for it, why I talk about it and try and bring it into parts of my job in human resources. So it might not be pride, but I definitely feel some purpose. And yeah, I feel pride, I guess, from the Black Lives Matter movement. I think inspires a lot of pride. I think it's a very difficult movement to pioneer. It's not, I say pioneer, it's been done actually by those who've gone before us, but it's a difficult movement to push through. And I'm really proud of everyone who has something to do with that. Yeah.
I don't remember who wanted to know if you have further ideas about how to stop racism from happening, especially among younger generations, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I guess so. So I guess my question to everyone is, do you ever see racism? Do you see people being called? I think there are some slang terms that are really negative in genre, right? That you speak, where you, I don't know, where you refer to different communities as, and again, we have these in England as well, where you refer to different communities, things like that. I think when you hear those, challenging those, I think is really important. Or, if someone says, oh, I'm talking about these people, and they use a bad word, you could say, oh, do you mean these people? And use the correct term for that group of people. I mean, I think there are lots of charities and like charitable organizations that do work, against discrimination. I'll try and find a couple for you, but there's always some, and especially somewhere like kind of a society as developed as Argentina, there would definitely be charities or organizations where you could learn a little bit about what they do, and maybe they hold events or do something that means you can volunteer with those. I could do a bit of research and then send those through to you, Analia. I think it's really important I think some of it is everything starts with ourselves. So we all have a level of unconscious bias where there are people that we see from different backgrounds, and it's natural, it's completely natural as a human being to go closer to the people that are like you. So look like you, sound like you, talk like you, eat the things you like, you know, we naturally like go towards people like us. It's just completely human nature. And then we have a bit more distance from those who feel further away from us. So are there any people in your lives, in your circles, in your community where you don't actually know that much about them? You don't know that much about their backgrounds. Why don't you find out, you know? And then it might be easier to have a conversation, it might be easier to ask questions. And so we all become a bit more inclusive when we do that, but it takes effort. You can't just end up like that, you know, like without that effort. I think it's really important. And so something I have to do is check my bias against people in the UK who are really, really, really posh, super posh. I think, oh gosh. But, you know, I have to say like, oh, I don't quite like that person. Then you think, wait, Elizabeth, why don't you like that person? Then I ask myself these questions. I realize, no, that's not based on anything they've done or anything they've said. It's just assumptions that you've made. So I would encourage you to just check your own bias, and then find some organizations that try to fight discrimination of different sorts. And it's not just racism. You'll know there's lots of isms. We have issues with sexism, we have issues with sexuality, so many things. So, but I really do think like reading up on these things and learning can be so helpful. I've learned so much just putting this presentation together today. So yeah, I would really encourage you to do that.
Yeah, such a good idea. I think Mika Lerner, in response to your question about names in connection with activism, she said that there is a group of young Black Argentine activists called Los Hermanos Afro, who give talks and hold events. And she says that this is eye-opening and very helpful. And apparently Alicia Alvarez, who is a student, is described as an activist herself by Mika.
Oh, great. Oh, thank you, Mika, and good work, Alicia. You're doing well. I will check them out. I've made it, Los Hermanos Afros. I've made a note of that. I will definitely check them out. So that's Mika's given us the first people we can go and do a Google search on and see what they're up to.
There is a comment by Alvaro about the, I don't get it, but quite get it, but he says that it was an honor to present their flag during, I think he's referring to the match, but well, and he says that he agrees with you about what you said, about the pressure while taking the penalties, and it was so terrible. That they should be reminded of their error, right?
Yeah, I agree with that, Alvaro. I do.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I have missed any questions. I guess that I don't find any other.
What did people say when I asked how many Afro-Argentines? Did you say there were some comments then?
They say that there were 150,000.
Okay, yeah.
So they were pretty right.
That's the official number. That's the official number.
Yeah, and that was plural because there were many answers, many correct answers to your question.
Okay. That's great. That's great.
Okay. Besides, a lot of people hate them. there's a huge part of people helping them to stay strong. Okay, and that might be considered progress. The fact that they are getting support, and this might be a step in the right direction. That's what Alvaro says, that despite the fact that there is discrimination, there are people reacting against it.
I totally agree, Alvaro. The one good thing about England losing to Italy is that this problem is now very, very open, and in the open, it's clear. This is the kind of thing we've been talking about for a long time, and actually it's sad, but also now we see it, we can fix it.
Right.
So,
yeah. And maybe this, as you said, gives visibility, right? And maybe we can be driven to act against it. All right. So I don't know if there are other questions. Gals, guys, if there's any other question you would like to, you would like me to put to Elizabeth, this is the moment to type it.
Okay. Thanks, Martha, for moderating the Q&A session, and thanks, Elizabeth.
My pleasure.
Thanks to our students for being so active today. I've been following the questions, and really very, very, very interesting questions. So, Elizabeth, then you can watch the video on your presentation, and then you can see all the questions and the comments that our students left. So thanks to our students. Please remember to complete the exit ticket. They are completing, they are giving their feedback. So Elizabeth, then you can also read that. I will give you access to that. So that's very interesting. And thanks again for participating for the second time. And we will let you have their students' feedback. And thanks for everything, for your reflections and your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And thank you for the brilliant questions, everybody. I really appreciate those. They really made me think.
Excellent. So see you tomorrow, everyone. Students, thanks, Elizabeth.